Today's workshop is called Core Apps for AEC. And this workshop is based around three of the kind of data, 2D drawing, and 3D model visualization platforms that Core Studio has produced over the last several years and made public to the whole AEC space to use for free. If you have any questions as we're going, I'll pause a few times to check, but feel free to speak up or put something into chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that as well and answer any questions as we go. Before we kind of get started, this link was sent out earlier to everyone, but if you haven't yet had an opportunity to do a few of the signups and downloads, we ask that you, if you want to follow along, basically take a few minutes now and particularly sign up for the core apps. When you go to this link at the top of the presentation, I'll just open this in a new incognito window. It should take you to a page that looks like this. And when you put your email in to sign up, just make sure to check the little boxes down here for Mirar, Thread, and Trace, which are the three apps we're going to be looking at today. You can also request Swarm if you'd like to try it out. Swarm is another application that we built over the last few years that essentially migrates Grasshopper to the web and makes it a mobilely accessible platform for running applications. And Swarm's actually merged with Shapediver and will be becoming a Shapediver in the span of the next year. So while we won't be looking at Swarm today, I do encourage everyone to give it a try. Once you've signed up for the core apps you should receive a verification email, and you'll just need to approve that to get access to the apps, just to verify that the email address was correct. And then it'll take a moment for Hanshen Sun, who is co-hosting the presentation today, to basically approve your credentials. So once that's done, you should have access to the app, so that might take a minute or two. Hanshen will also be available in chat or for direct message if you would like to ask him any questions throughout the day. So I'll say hi real quick, Hanshen.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions with regards to this workshop.
And as we're going through the presentation today, if anything is a little too quick or you want to go over it again or you have additional questions, again, just feel free to interrupt at any time and ask a question as we go. So once you have signed up for the core applications, you'll then have access to the downloads for the plugins for Mirar, Thread, and Trace. We'll just primarily be looking at the Mirar installer today, which is available for Revit 2018 and 2019 currently. We hope to add 2020 and 2021 in the next couple of weeks as part of the updates. And you can also download the Trace plugin, but as we discovered in yesterday's workshop, the two are currently conflicting with each other a little bit, so that's also something we'll be addressing over the next week so that the two can work in parallel. But if you haven't signed up yet, that's just going to take you to a blank page, so don't worry about it. You just have to wait for the approval process to go through, so might need a refresh or two, and then you'll be able to download the plugin. We'll actually be starting with the Mirar exporter for Revit in today's workshop. So I'll just really quickly kind of walk through that download process. But additional information on that is available under the Mirar page here, which I believe is page 9. Yep. So if you want to kind of go ahead and try to install that if you haven't already, there's some kind of instructions here. Now, this is one of our oldest apps, so I'll just walk through this process real quick and then leave a little time for anyone who's catching up. But whenever you download the Mirar, excuse me, the Mirar plugin, in this case for Revit 2019, there's just a few little things you need to do. One is, like a lot of these downloads for installers, you need to right-click on that zip folder and go down to Properties, and then you'll need to unblock it. And then you can open that zip file. The second thing you'll need to do is you'll need to navigate to Revit's plugins. Now, unfortunately, as I said, this is one of our oldest apps, so we don't have an installer built for this one. So it's a kind of a copy and paste of all of the libraries and the plugins that needs to go into the Revit folder. So there is a link again in the presentation that kind of shows the file path here for where the installers need to be placed. And you just need to replace your username with the username from your computer. Once you navigate to that path, which is basically from C drive to users, your profile, app data, which might be hidden, in which case you just need to type in app data, or you can copy and paste from here. You need to go to roaming, Autodesk. I know it's very easy and very short. Revit, add-ins, 2019. And then you just want to copy everything over from that zip file into this folder here. Now again, that path to that location is available here. And if you haven't done this already, the instructions are also available in the download for all the specifics. But if you have any issues, just send Hanshen a message and we'll see if we can work through that in the next few minutes. So while everyone's installing that, just a few more assets that are kind of available here. For each one of the applications that we're going to be looking at today, Mirar, Thread, and Trace, we've provided a kind of sample file of the type of content we'll be creating in the workshop today. And if you've ever seen these applications before in one of our workshops or in our AECtech Academy videos on YouTube, which have a lot more information about different aspects of the application that we'll be looking at today. Today, we're pretty much just going to be looking at the web apps themselves. We'll talk a little bit about the export process for Mirar, but we're going to talk about how to basically move information back and forth and connect these apps together. So as I mentioned, there's kind of a little sample project for each one, which kind of gives an idea of what we'll be looking at. As we go through the presentation, if you don't have Revit 2018, don't have Revit 2019, don't worry about it. We'll be going through the install process so you can kind of get a preview of how that'll work, or sorry, the upload process, so you can get a preview of how that'll work. But we also have kind of preset examples available for each step along the way. So, if you're missing any of the kind of desktop software as part of the upload process, don't worry about it. As soon as that part's over, we'll have a new file that you can work with anyway to look at as an example. So while everyone is taking a moment to install the applications, just talk a little bit about the outline for today's workshop. So we're going to be looking at 3 applications around kind of visualization and sharing information via the web. The first one is called Mirar, and Mirar is basically a 3D model viewer that combines model geometry from Revit, CSI tools, and also from Grasshopper into a common web platform where you can visualize the model and also access the attributes that are available either from Revit's BIM attributes or from attributes that you assign inside of something like Grasshopper in one of the applications. And the kind of purpose behind Mirar is to be a kind of analysis and BIM visualization platform that allows kind of collaborative interaction in addition to data visualization via the model. So we'll be looking at the process of exporting a model from Revit, how to explore that model using the Mirar platform, how to customize the workspace in Mirar a little bit, and then also how to share and download content from that file. We'll actually be using the download from that Mirar model to drive the second application we'll be looking at today called Thread, which is an expansion of a project that Core Studio developed several years ago called Design Explorer. And what this is it's basically a data visualization platform geared more towards the AEC industry. So it has a lot of similarities to kind of functionality and kind of some of the basic workflows as something like Power BI or Tableau. Certainly not as powerful. But what it does bring to the table is it has an interaction with 3D geometry and 2D drawings. And it also, excuse me, I'm still getting over a Midwest harvest error. It also has the ability to cross-filter information and then also to directly export content out from both from Grasshopper and pull information from BIM models as well. And the last application we'll be looking at is one that's very much hot off the presses called Trace. And Trace basically looks to bring the same type of data and model exploration that we're going to see in Mirar to 2D drawing sets. And so we'll talk about that one a little bit more when we get to that part of the presentation. Before we jump into the presentation, just a little bit of background on the kind of development trajectories that Core Studio has kind of worked on over the last couple of years. So Core Studio develops a whole series of apps that are both publicly available to the entire AEC industry and general design industry, and also several kind of interior practice-based applications for Thornton Tomasetti's various engineering and consultancy divisions. We generally group these together into 4 categories. The first category is automation, and the kind of apps that are listed here are really about kind of expediting existing workflows or offering up new workflows that kind of help through the engineering and kind of design process for both TT and also more recently for the larger design community. And the idea behind automation is to kind of take the tedious, repetitive processes that introduce a lot of potential for inaccuracy through data entry and changing information between multiple platforms, and make the kind of connection between those processes more fluid and then therefore more efficient. One of the apps that I mentioned earlier, Swarm, that's publicly available coming out of this, basically brings Grasshopper to the web. And the idea here was to kind of take the kind of everyday workflows that you might be doing in something like a Rhino or even Revit potentially, or Illustrator, where you're manually kind of going through a series of operations, or you're doing a series of complex sequences that end up taking a lot of time and require a high degree of kind of accuracy in the process. And instead kind of basically making the kind of power of Grasshopper accessible to people who aren't necessarily Grasshopper users by wrapping it up in a little dashboard. So as I mentioned, I encourage everyone to try Swarm and also Shapediver as well. The second trajectory that we kind of develop applications for is interoperability. And so this was actually kind of the founding of Core Studio, was around a project called TTX, which is basically a model and data exchange between, at that time, CSI tools, Revit, and Rhino/Grasshopper. And over time, that's developed into a platform called Construe, which is actually available for usage. It's a paid platform, but is a interoperability solution geared towards engineering, but also some practical applications for architecture. The third trajectory is structures AI, and this is where we've actually been putting a lot of energy lately. And so if you're able to participate in our fall event, we'll be showing some of the newer developments around the implementation of AI and machine learning in several different applications. But this has kind of been a real, I'd say, focal interest for Core Studio lately, where we've been developing everything from structures AI to crack detection with products like T2D2, and also been developing a generalized machine learning platform called Cortex, which we'll be making public sometime in the future for everyone to see. The fourth trajectory, which is what we're going to be looking at today, is visualization. And so visualization platforms that we develop are really about both the displaying and accessing information that BIM and CAD platforms sometimes kind of bury within the families themselves and make difficult to visualize, and also putting those up on a web platform for each one of these where they are collaborative, so that you can share them with multiple users. And also you can add additional visualization functionality, which is what we'll be looking at today. Oops. Before we talk about Mirar, are there any questions so far, or does anyone have any issues with the installers they'd like a little assistance with? No? Okay, great. So the first application we'll be looking at today as part of the workshop portion is application Mirar. Someone asked if we are recording the session. Yes, we are recording it and we'll be making it accessible after the workshop. Not quite sure where yet. That's a little above what I know at the moment. But yes, the sessions are recorded and will be made available. So Mirar is one of the first web applications that Core Studio put out as being a publicly available resource for the AEC community. And what Mirar allows you to do is it allows you to take your BIM and analysis models, upload them to the web, access the attributes that have been applied to each one of the elements within the model, and also go through a series of kind of visualization and analysis display modes that allow you to kind of explore the model on the web. This interactivity is also collaborative in that the models can be shared, and these are the kind of different aspects we're going to be looking at today. So as I mentioned earlier, you can download the Revit plugin once your user has been approved, and you can install it to this location. Once you've done that, you can use a Revit file you have laying around if you'd like to, but we've also provided a sample file which is available here. And this Revit file just kind of shows how you can use a series of families within the Revit environment to upload to Mirar for visualization. So what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at the process of taking that Revit model and then uploading it and filtering the attributes to the Mirar platform, where we can then go to that particular model and then visualize it on the web, navigate around it, and interact with the model itself. So to do that, we're going to start with that sample file. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I'm just going to open up that sample. Okay, and we can see we have a little bit shorter version of a tower that we used at last year's AECtech event. Tried to make it a little smaller and more efficient for uploading. But we see we have multiple different families loaded in the model here. We have a very non-correctly integrated 2 layers of slabs. We have some curtain walls, some columns, and then some interior walls for the drastically undersized core for this project. And what we're looking to do here is we want to kind of take this model and all the attributes that are associated with both the type, if we edit type and see the parameters that have been associated with it, and also the instance itself. So things like the perimeter, the area, volume, all these things that automatically get generated in Revit. And we want to upload this model in conjunction with these attributes to our web viewer and then interact with the attributes themselves. Depending on the family type and Revit's capability, we can also add additional attributes. So I'm just going to add one simple attribute here called hello to the comments. And so we can change any of the properties that are accessible here, add information, or if the family type allows, we can add additional type properties to the actual family itself. And all of these will be accessible within Mirar once we upload to the web. Quick note on this particular model, just to keep the file size down, the curtain wall itself is just a generic curtain wall, so there's nothing like mullions or any of those other types of families integrated into it. Mirar can handle all of the different kind of 3D element-based geometry, including direct shapes, and upload them. So we would have access to all the kind of mullions, the spandrels, the different kind of curtain wall assemblies that we might build up in our Revit model. But just for the sake of time and uploading all of those elements, they've been removed and just the generic curtain wall has been left. Also, if you have any curve-based information or analytic information in the model, that won't actually be uploaded to Mirar. Mirar purely deals in the kind of 3D geometry inside of the Revit interface. If you use the Grasshopper plugin, you do have the ability to draw curves and other additional information to Mirar, but we're just going to focus on Revit for today's workshop. Another thing to note is kind of what you see is pretty much what you get in terms of family visibility inside of the Revit platform. So if I just wanted to upload a smaller chunk of the building, I could actually just grab that section, isolate those elements, and then when I go to upload to Mirar, only the elements that are currently visible within the view will be uploaded to the Mirar platform. This also includes elements that get filtered away as part of a section box or crop box. So here we can see we've kind of cropped off Let me go ahead and turn that on real quick. There we go. Whoops, wrong one. Oh, I must have hidden it. There we go. So we can see we've applied a section box to this model, which is clipping the floor slabs. One thing to note about using Mirar is it won't actually export the clipped geometry because the actual geometry itself hasn't been changed and it works off the original mesh. This is basically just kind of a visual override inside of Revit. However, any of the curtain panels that have been completely filtered away, so in this case, all of these kind of curtain panels out here have actually been hidden as part of the scope box that was applied to this. What do they call it? I just forget the correct name for it. Yeah, scope box. Within there, these have also been filtered away. So if we were to upload this model, we would actually have all of these panels missing. So just a few things to kind of consider as part of the upload process is even though it won't be sectioning the geometry, any geometry that was basically removed or completely hidden as part of a section box won't be uploaded. So in this case, I probably want to just start with a default 3D view. So I'll go up and click the little house icon up here. And I'm just going to do that so I guarantee that I have all of my curtain panels in the model itself. And we'll also see how even though there's these kind of annotation objects in the model, those won't actually upload to Mirar. So in terms of using the Revit exporter, this is actually all we need in order to use the Mirar exporter. We just need the geometry of the families, and we also want attributes that we can access. So to run Mirar, I'm going to go up to the Core Apps tab, which if your install was successful, should now be available in the ribbon at the top of Revit. And I'm going to go over and click on the Mirar exporter here. And this is going to bring up this little interface. And the first thing I'm going to need to do inside of the Mirar exporter is I just need to log in. And this will associate my Revit session and the exporter with my account on the web application, which will allow me to export my content to the web app. So I'm going to click on the Core Login button here. And I'm, in my case, going to click on the TT employee login. But for everyone else, you can just use the login on the right to enter first your email address and then your password. And it's actually easier for you to do that than it is to go through this process. So apologies for the multiple times today. I'm going to have to go through this particular login process. Today, I'm fortunate that it happened to remember me. We'll see once you've correctly logged in that your avatar or the default avatar that's been created should appear. And then also your kind of username or the first part of your email should also appear here. And if anyone has any issues with that, again, feel free to reach out. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the web application for just 1 minute and just show that what I'm actually seeing inside of the Revit desktop client is I'm seeing a list of all of the projects that I currently have. Now, I've been using Mirar for a while, so I have a lot of projects. You may not have any projects if you haven't tried out using Mirar yet. So to create your first project, you can either hit the green plus sign here and give it a project name, or you also have the ability to do that inside of the Mirar exporter inside of Revit. So in this case, if I want to add a new project directly from the client, I'm going to click the little green plus sign here. And we'll just call this one AECtech demo. And what a project is inside of Mirar is a project is basically a collection of various model uploads and also display setting configurations that we'll be working on today. So it gives you the ability to upload either multiple different states of a model, perhaps over time, multiple different versions of a model and turn those on and off, or different parts of a larger model. So if you're doing a master plan, you might upload some kind of generic massing versions of some of the buildings and perhaps some more detailed versions of the particular buildings you're designing. And maybe you want to upload those in multiple different waves so you can swap out some of the information. That's kind of where this project level organization comes in. The next level inside of that is the actual model itself that we're going to be uploading. Now you can overwrite an existing model if you've already created one by clicking on this drop down here. But since we don't have any models yet, we're just going to hit new. And I'll just call this one my first upload. Now at this point, I could go ahead and click OK, and it will upload the model and all of the attributes as is. But one of the useful features within Mirar is I'm going to click this little checkbox down here for filter attributes. And now when I hit OK to upload the model, it's going to take me to this second screen that's going to pop up and give me the ability to filter out different attributes within the project itself. So in this screen that pops up, we have different tabs for each one of the categories of the family types that we're uploading. And we can actually expand this out a little bit to see some more. So we have our ceilings, our columns, curtain panels, grids, floors, levels, again, which won't be visible, but are still available as part of the export, walls, etc. And in each one of these, we can go in and we can choose which attributes we want to actually upload. So for example, I might click this little check, uncheck all button down here to select everything. But then I'm not necessarily interested in the default phase created, phase demolished, because that information may not change. I also may not need things like the room information or potentially an image. I don't have that. If it's not visible, it won't necessarily show up in the model, but let's say there are attributes assigned to each one of these, such as phase created and phase demolished, but it's something I'm not really interested in seeing. So I can uncheck any of those properties I don't want to show up inside of Mirar. So I'll just quickly move through the rest of the categories and just uncheck those three. And you can go ahead and check them all as well. It's not really going to impact anything to do this. Okay. And one additional thing to note here is for something like levels or curtain wall grids, these don't actually show up in Mirar. So I could actually just leave these completely unchecked so that the data doesn't actually get uploaded for these as well. And once I've created a configuration for the attributes I do and don't want to upload from this model, I have to assume, based on using these types of applications, and spending 10 years in architecture, kind of going through the design process with each one of these, that there's probably going to be changes to that model where I'm going to want to upload new versions, but I don't want to have to go through this process of clicking and going through the selection every time. So down at the bottom here, I can go and hit this little plus sign to create a filter. Now, one little quirk that seems to happen whenever you're on Zoom is that the second dialog box shows up behind the first one for some reason. So I'm going to go ahead and close that real quick and just move this over to the side and click that little plus sign again. So I don't think this happens consistently, though it might with the application. If so, let us know. But I can save this as my custom filter 1 and hit OK. And now whatever configuration I had for checking the different attributes and filtering them is now saved. And I can click this drop down to basically select between this as one from yesterday's workshop and then one from today. And then if I do another upload, I'll be able to reapply the filter states. I can also click the edit button if I want to make changes to that as well. Okay, so at this point, I've filtered the attributes that I want to upload, and I've also modified the model. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And the upload process will begin. So the first thing we're going to see down here is there's some processing that takes place on the Revit side to basically extract all of the 3D mesh geometry. And then there is a parsing over of that geometry that hands it over to the Mirar uploader. So this is just a secondary little application that launches in the background and just goes through the process of uploading that geometry from Revit to the Mirar web application. Now, this goes pretty quick for a small model like this, but depending on the complexity of your model, such as if we had every curtain wall panel, it can take a few minutes to upload. And generally, the model size can be fairly large and still upload correctly, though you'll take a little bit of a performance impact on the web application itself. So we'll see this will be finished pretty soon. And once it's complete, it's actually going to take us to that current Mirar view of the model that we just uploaded. So that should be just 1 second. So while that's uploading, are there any kind of questions about the Mirar exporting process? No? Okay. Okay, so we're going to see that Mirar has automatically taken us to the current model, and we can watch the elements begin to filter in. So you can get an idea, basically, the speed relative to the complexity of the model, how quickly this will load. Now, I will say it's not tremendously faster, but it is definitely faster when you're not presenting over something like Zoom or something that's using quite a bit of your bandwidth. This loading process can actually go a little bit quicker, depending on how much memory is available within Chrome or your preferred browser. Okay, but as we kind of watch this load in, what we're seeing is basically now a web representation of each one of those BIM elements as 3D geometry. And we can click on any one of those elements and see the attributes that we assign to it, including down here on this particular floor plate, we put a comment that said hello. And if I go and click on another floor plate, I'll see that there are no existing comments other than the kind of floor height, which was pre-created. But we can see that that information that we put in here now shows up as part of the attributes, so we can add in custom attributes. I can also go in and click on any one of these attributes and begin to color the model based on the attribute value itself. So in this case, we're dealing with a bunch of numbers and a piece of text. So it's going to do string sorting on each one of these, or sorting by the text characters, to color this information and then reflect that in the actual model geometry. So here we can see that now each one of those floor plates that has the comments applied to them has now been colored based on the particular comment. And because earlier in this particular Revit file, I applied, select this floor again, I applied a numeric value to each one of the floor plates down here. We'll see those numbers being reflected here. And then we'll also see hello up at the top in the color range. Now, depending on the type of attribute we want to color by, maybe something like elevation at bottom, the sorting type might change. So because this is all numeric, we're now just sorting based on the numeric values here, not actually based on the text itself. So we're going to get a much cleaner kind of color change throughout our gradient, because our gradient is basically going from the lowest elevation at the bottom up to the highest. And then we can see that reflected here in our kind of legend. And so all of the attributes now, including the family types and the information like perimeter lengths, and all this can now be accessed. And we'll notice when a certain element type doesn't have a property, such as a curtain wall panel doesn't have a perimeter length, that particular element gets kind of ghosted out in this light gray. So it isn't completely hidden by default in the settings, but if that attribute doesn't exist on that particular element, second to click here, then it simply goes to this kind of ghosted mode so that you can focus in on the elements themselves. And let's say that I wanted to do something like click on one of these individual floor plates. Right now I'm going to run into a little bit of an issue where, even though they're hard to see, there's curtain panels blocking almost all these floor plates on the interior. So now we can actually start to play with a different attribute inside of the object to turn on and off the different layers. Before we do that, are there any kind of questions or thoughts about the kind of interaction between the 3D geometry and the pre-existing Revit attributes that are now kind of clickable entities on the web application? Oh, okay. So let's say that I want to turn all the curtain wall panels off, either to improve the visualization so I'm not kind of getting this ghosted gray, or also to make it easier to click on each one of those slabs and maybe find out information about that particular floor plate. I can go over here to the right-hand side to my menu options, and at the top I'm going to see a little button here for options. When I click on that, I'm going to get an expanded panel that has a few different things I can modify. One is I have my kind of model and layers. Now, if I upload multiple different models, I would actually see those models listed on top of one another here and have the ability to turn them on and off as an entire model. And I can also control the overall opacity of the model itself. So let's say I did something like load in a context for background of building masses and perhaps a master plan or just city context. And I don't want them to be quite as bold. I could actually take the entire object and basically lower its opacity. Inside of each one of these objects, I have a series of layers. Now, from a Revit export, this basically maps Revit's categories to each one of the layers. From Grasshopper, the Grasshopper Exporter, you have complete control of how you want to group these layers together. So again, in that kind of master planning scenario, it might be things like by program, by road, by owner, whatever it happens to be in the kind of setup. But we can go in now and we can either control the opacity of individual objects or just completely turn them off. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off by clicking the little light bulb my curtain wall panels. And maybe I want to keep the columns in there to kind of give an idea of scale and kind of help reinforce the kind of geometry. But now I can go in and click on any one of those floor plates and more easily see its individual attributes here because I've turned off those curtain wall panels and that geometry is no longer kind of up front. And I can go in and turn them back on at any time if I want to re-include them in the overall visualization. So the nice thing about this is grouping by categories, it becomes very easy to kind of just turn on and off whole parts of the project. So for example, if you upload this file with all the mullions and everything, the mullions might be a little bit heavy and slow. So as you're kind of panning around in 3D, you can just turn them off and then they're no longer considered as part of the 3D scene. So it'll improve the performance. For example, if I were to turn off those curtain panels again, which has the largest amounts, we'll see that I can really quickly kind of spin the model around. But when I turn them on, just because there's more geometry in the scene, like any CAD or BIM platform, it's going to be a little bit slower. So we're going to see a few kind of hiccups take place as we begin to rotate this geometry. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of the model settings and the layers. The next thing we want to look at is the color by attributes. So this is basically the ability we have to click on any one of these elements, click on an attribute, and then to color the model based on that attribute. Now, several reasons you might use this. One is part of a presentation we've used this for to basically talk about different facets of a project, whether that's kind of program, floor heights. In this case, we'll look at a version of this later that has things like overlook to kind of understand the desirability of floor plates, different kind of analytic attributes that we've added to our particular data set. The other reason might be looking for things like anomalies. For example, this floor plate down here keeps getting colored yellow. And if I went back in the model, I'd find out that this was actually just a level and I didn't put in a floor plate down there. So this kind of pops out because it's not falling into our regular data set here. So one of the other kind of useful purposes for Mirar is to kind of expose the data in a really visually intuitive way so that you can kind of look for things that seem out of place. For example, if we were to take these floor slabs and go in and do the height elevation at the bottom. If suddenly we saw a blue floor plate up here, perhaps in a Rhino model or something like that, we might know that something's actually wrong with that particular attribute assigned to that element because it doesn't seem to match the rest of the model geometry. But we may not like this particular color scheme because either we have an association with another type of analysis, something like daylighting or another FEA program, or we just don't think it's visually clear enough or maybe match the kind of aesthetic of the project graphics and design as part of a larger presentation. So you can actually click on the drop down here for your legend colors and choose from a whole series of pre-made color palettes, including one called Metro. Which just kind of has a kind of different overall aesthetic to the colors and maybe something that's, either a little bit more visually clear or perhaps, better matches the desire for the visualization style you'd like. There's also an option down here to clip the model geometry to sections. And you can turn on this option and then you can move a section plane through your model back and forth. You can flip the direction of the sectioning. And you can also change which axis you section the model in. And you can also do a section box as well to do a similar thing. This is somewhat limited by the 3JS library that's underneath it. So you don't see things like filled regions at the sections, but you are able to actually kind of cut that model and begin to open it up. I'll go ahead and turn that off again. Okay. Now, the next option we have here is to choose from pre-configured views. So if I click on this dropdown right now, the only view that I have is one called the initial view here. And if I click on that, it's going to take me to the default view that the model created. But maybe I want to create my own views. However, before I do that, I might want to modify the scene. I'm looking at this, I kind of like this color palette, everything's good, but I think it would be a little bit stronger on a darker background. So I can actually customize the way that Mirar looks by going down here to the viewer settings And down in the visualization category, and again, sorry, that's a little button up there, viewer settings, I can go in and change some of the background colors. Apologize, there's an Amazon delivery in the background. You're just gonna have to ignore it. For the background here, I'm gonna click on this little area and I can slide this color palette down to give this, let's say, something like a darker kind of charcoal color for the background. It can be any color you want. You know, if you really like red backgrounds for some reason, you could do that. But we'll go with this kind of lighter charcoal color. And this will kind of introduce this background in all different directions. So now maybe our geometry pops a little bit, but I'd like to get a better kind of indication of kind of where this is sitting relative to the horizon. So I'm going to click this little second option down here for a ground plane, and I'm going to give that a color as maybe pure black. And so now I've kind of introduced a ground plane, which is going to put a horizon into the scene. Now the horizon itself is a little bit harsh. It's kind of introducing a line that maybe I don't want to see in the model. So if I want to soften that horizon, I can also enable fog, which is basically just going to add a little bit of kind of blurring or atmospheric depth. Now I have to be careful with this. If I do too much fog, my model is going to disappear. But if I lower that kind of fog down, I can just soften that horizon line a little bit and still get a hint of kind of where the camera is relative to the horizon, but still have a kind of cleaner view of my model. Now we'll also notice when I darken the background, it also kind of darkened the scene. So if I want to go in and kind of brighten the scene up to make sure that my colors really pop against that darker background, I can go back up here to my ambient light, click here and just lighten up that illumination source. I want to be careful not to completely blow it out so it maybe gets too washed out, but I can kind of choose a lighter color which will brighten up the overall scene illumination. And there's also a second light source in here, a point light, which gives a little bit of directional light to it, which is kind of where this kind of darker edge is coming from on this side. So I can modify that as well. But for my purposes, I think this looks fine. So before we talk about the next set of options, are there any kind of questions about customizing the visualizations within Mirar? Oh, okay. All right. I can also go in and do a few things, like I can change the selection color. I can change my units if I upload the model to incorrect units and I want to remap that. There's some different things I can change here if I want. But for right now, I'm pretty happy with the appearance of this model relative to how I'd like to use it. So now what I'd like to do is I'd actually like to take this model and I'd like to share it with either a client as part of a presentation, a consultant as part of a kind of exchange package, or a team as kind of part of a design process. So if I want to share this model and make it accessible to outside parties, I can just go down here and click on the little share icon or social media icon down here, which will bring up this little window. Now the first warning it's going to give me is right now my project is private. And what that means is unless I've given someone direct access to the model, which we'll take a look at in a minute, they don't actually have the ability to see the model. They're just going to go to a blank screen. So all of my data and my model information is kind of secure. If I want to share that model, I have to actually make that project public, which means that anyone who has this link potentially has access to it. Now, in all reality, no one is going to find this on Google or anything like that. You would just have to have access to that hyperlink. And in several kind of projects where there's been more proprietary work, basically what our teams have done is made the project public for the duration of the meeting and then just made it private right afterwards again. But I have the ability now to share this link to this particular view. And if I open a new incognito window, which means that I'm not logged in and I don't have any credentials, and I go to that link, this means that even if I haven't signed up for Mirar, I've never used any of these applications before, I'm on a phone or a tablet, it kind of doesn't matter here, and I go in, I now actually have access to that view that was set up. And I can go in and I can still click and access the data and the attributes in the elements itself. So that means that not only do I have access to the 3D model, but I also have the ability to go in and change around the visualizations that I'm going to see, modify some of the properties here, including turning that clipping plane back off again, changing the legend colors around. So you can kind of give your user or your teammate access to a whole bunch of different settings that kind of give them the full Mirar usage. The other thing you can do, though, is if you want to limit what someone can do with that particular view, you can go back to your viewer settings And up here under the project viewer options, you can limit what someone can actually do with the view itself. So I can turn off things like I don't want them to be able to use the clipping plane. I don't want them to be able to color by attributes, measurement, layers, model properties, or change models. Maybe I just want them to basically have just the viewer itself. And so I'm going to go ahead and let's leave that on. It doesn't seem happy about that. Let's go ahead and hit Save Options here. And so now we basically turned off everything except switching views and then changing models, which we don't have a model, so we won't change. So I'm once again going to go up to my options, and I'm just going to color this model based on, let's just do the type. There we go, type name. So now we're just going to color this based on the family type name. And I'm going to change my color palette around because I really don't like the way that looks. So I might try a different, oof, that's hideous. Again, I came from a design background, so I'm a bit picky about these things. Okay, and I want to kind of find a view that maybe when they open it up, they get a good sense of kind of what this project is about from a design perspective. And maybe I need to brighten up that ambient light just a little bit more with this new color palette. And I might even brighten up the point light a little bit to get some higher contrast. And let's try turning the model and seeing if we can find a better angle on that. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now I've kind of curated my view. I've also limited what the user can do with it. So I'm going to click Share New View to create a new view, copy this, open that in my incognito window. And once that model loads up, we see we have a little bug here with that clipping plane still being persistent. But we'll see here that all of my options for color by have gone away. I don't have the ability to make those changes anymore. And also the option to turn that clipping plane off has gone away as well. So there's a little bug here. I can click on the elements and I can still color by, but I can't change any of the color by attributes. And I also can't modify the filtering. So even though I have access to that information that's available here, I can't actually modify the default color by attributes that are used. Okay, so I've now actually created two different views inside of Mirar. So now that we've seen how we can go in and modify the appearance of Mirar, and we can also go in and create a shared model, let's look at how to access those existing shared views, and then how to add additional users in as part of a kind of collaborative process using Mirar. So if I click on the dropdown under the project name, I can go here to my Views tab inside of my settings window, and this is going to show me my two views, which has both been called Untitled. So I'm going to go in and first edit those names so I can remember what they are a little bit easier. So I'll call this one Full Access View. And I'm going to click the little edit button on the second one here, and I'll call this just Limited Access, and hit Save. And so now I've just renamed those two views, so it's a little bit easier to know what each one is. And if I click on any one of those, it's going to take me to that view state. It'll take just a minute for that to load up and go back to that filtered condition. So back in my views now, I can also look at a few options for sharing. If I want to share that link with anyone outside of the project, I can click on the copy link button and get that hyperlink copied to the clipboard. I can also save a QR code if I want to print this out as part of a handout or a physical presentation, on the wall, or some boards that are going to be accessible to the public. And someone can actually scan this with a phone and access the model or a tablet, and actually access the model and interact with it on a mobile device. So if you were to actually scan the screen right now, you'd be able to load this model up on your phone, which might take a second depending on your connection, but you can still spin around it, interact with it, even on a mobile device. And you can download this QR code and then use it wherever you'd like. I can also choose one of these views to be the default image for the project. So if I click this button now, next time I go and look at the projects, that icon will replace the current project view, and we'll see that in a second. And if I have a view I want to get rid of, like maybe one I don't want people to have access to anymore, I can also delete it. I also get a little indication here of how many hits or how many times a unique viewer has opened this particular view and looked at it other than myself. So that kind of gives me a tally of how many people have accessed or seen this view. I also have the ability under the settings tab then to make the project private again. So if I want to edit it here, I can click the edit button and I can switch it over to private, which means those views will no longer be accessible. If I save that edit, that model will become private again. I'm just going to cancel those so it stays public for right now. Oops, let's make sure it's set to public. Okay. And if I want to share the model with someone without making the project private, maybe someone in the team or a consultant or someone I'm working directly with, I can hit this little plus sign here and I can add someone like Hanshen to the model. I'm not even going to try to type out Thornton Tomasetti. Paste it there, add the user, and then set, oops, sometimes it gets a little jammed up. As I mentioned before, this is the first app we ever made, so it has some history. As soon as that loads back up, I should probably just go here in Mirar. We'll give that a second to load. Okay, so I'm going to open my demo file here. And I'll go back to my settings for just a second. There we go. And now I can set the permissions. So I can give Hanshen edit permission, which means he can upload to the project, he can modify names, views, all of those things. And I can give him admin permission, which means that he could also delete the project completely. And I can also remove Hanshen as a user and hit save. And then I can kind of control who has access to the model at what time. So that's kind of a full kind of round trip on how the Mirar model visualization platform works. What we're going to look at now is how we can actually take data from this model, bring it down in a CSV file, and then use it to kind of develop a more interactive dashboard using the Thread platform. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the viewer one more time. And once the model has completely loaded into the scene, I'm going to watch the progress bar down here. Okay, there we go. As an owner of a model, I have an additional button at the bottom of my kind of controls over here on the right, which is to download the data as a CSV. If I click that button, it's going to go through and generate a CSV, which is a comma-separated values file. Basically, it's tabular data, like an Excel file. And I'm going to load that up inside of Excel just to look at that information. And what we'll see here is I have every category that I filtered and exported listed as a column header up at the top. I have an additional one over here, which is the universal ID. And this is just the ID of the model geometry inside of Mirar, which we'll see in a minute we can actually use to access the model from an outside application. And then if I scroll down here, depending on the family type, I will or won't have particular properties. So here when we get to walls, we have additional properties that aren't available in other things like the curtain panel. So let's go up and see what that property is. Category J. So that's basically the structural information, whether or not it is a structural wall. And so this now gives us that info there. But we can see that at one, I have a lot of geometry to filter through, but two, I have a lot of data. But this data is also very cleanly organized. And so this would actually be an acceptable file type that I could upload to something like Thread. However, as we make the transition over to Thread, we're going to use a little bit simpler data set. So one, you're not dependent on the kind of Mirar model that was available. And then two, we're going to do something with more limited data, so it's easier to understand the interaction between the model and data. So before we pivot away from Mirar to Thread, are there any kind of final questions about the Mirar application or interface? So one thing to note about Mirar and all the applications we're looking at today is we're going to be slowly migrating these together into a more centralized platform. So the types of interactions right now that kind of require downloading and uploading and all of these things will eventually be a lot more tightly orchestrated. So the kind of interactions we'll be looking at will be possible in a lot easier way. But just kind of want to give everyone an idea of how that can work. All right, so I'm going to jump back to the presentation for just a minute to talk about the next application we're going to be looking at, which is called Thread. And Thread, as I said before, is basically a data visualization and exploration platform that's geared towards developing dashboards and kind of analytic reports that both allow you to combine general design assets like images and text and embeds from other sites, including videos, and combine those with data that can have interaction with 2D and 3D elements. So the nice thing about Thread is very customizable in terms of how you actually begin to structure your layouts and what type of information you want to display. And what we're seeing now is we're actually seeing an example of what we'll be building, which is an interaction between a Thread report, which is kind of what we're seeing on the left in the view, and then a particular widget or object inside of a Thread report, which interacts with our Mirar model, increasing the ability of what we can do with Mirar, but also giving us access to just generalized data visualization if we'd like. And so if we wanted to do more than Mirar can actually do in terms of filtering, searching, something like that, we can actually begin to use a Thread to drive a more interactive experience, but we can also glean more information out of our data set using some of the widgets we'll be looking at shortly. So to start in Thread, what we're going to be looking at is creating a new project and data set. So what I'd like everyone to do is, if you're following along, go ahead and use this data set available in, pardon me, in the second little link here. And this is just a much smaller CSV rather than thousands of data points and thousands of model elements. We basically just have like 22 models elements here, and then a much smaller kind of curated data set that we created. And this was actually made using the Grasshopper plugin for Mirar, which can integrate into Thread. But you can also use a Revit export. But as we saw, it just comes with a lot more information than maybe we wanted. So if you download this data, it should come in as a CSV, which you'll be able to upload. We'll come back to these two links in a minute. Once you've downloaded that data, we want to go ahead and create our first Thread project and data set. So I'm going to go ahead and click this link, which will take me to my Thread projects page. Now, if you haven't created a project on Thread before, you're not going to see anything down here. You're just going to kind of see a blank screen and then this plus sign. And what this plus sign lets you do is similar to Mirar. If I click that, that lets me create my first project. So I'll call this one AECtech demo. And similar to Mirar, what projects are basically like a top-level collection of, in this case, data. And one way to think about them is you can think about them like your workbook or your file in Excel that maybe has multiple different tabs or sheets within that Excel file where you can organize different sets of data inside of one accessible project. When you create the project, you're going to get this new card, or if you're in list mode, this new list item down here. And you can click on that, and that will bring you to the datasets page. Now, because I don't currently have any data in this project, I want to create my first dataset collection that I'm going to populate with data from my CSV file. So I'm going to hit the little plus sign here, and I can upload as many datasets as I want. You know, if I make a little mistake and want to upload a new one, or if I want to upload different versions of something, I can add as many as I want. But I'm just going to start with my first data set and click Save Changes. And this is going to create a new little card here that we can click on to upload our first data. If we've already uploaded data, we can always click on the little uploader button down here to go in and upload our new data set. But since we don't have any data, we can go ahead and click on the card, and that will take us to our data upload page. Now, this is where we can actually generate the data that we'll want to visualize inside of the dashboard that we're creating. So I can either drag it in, or I can click Browse, and I can grab that particular data set that I just downloaded. So again, that's the data set that was available here from the download in the main presentation. the first thing that's going to happen is the information actually gets parsed in the background. And what Thread tries to do is Thread tries to figure out what type of data it is. Is it a string, which is text? Or is it a number? Is it a tag collection? Or is it a date? And it's going to try to differentiate between those 4 different types. Generally, it gets it right. But let's say that we had some floor areas down here that came in as a number, but we want to treat them like text because maybe we wanted to add in meters squared or something like that, and we're going to edit it. We can change the type of data it is, but this will basically change the way Thread interacts with it. We also see we have this little green icon here, which is telling us this is the first time that this particular column name has been uploaded. So if I open that data again, each one of our data points gets grouped together by its kind of column name. So whenever we're doing things like comparing data, it's basically looking at that column name or ID to compare the information. So we want to make sure with our data set that basically we're always formatting it with the first line being the kind of column ID, and then all the data down below consistently being of the same type. So each one of our entries, whether these are model elements, they're just simply raw data from a survey or something like that, or they are attributes that we've loaded in via something like Grasshopper. We just want to make sure that the data contained in each column matches the purpose assigned to it in the name at the top. And we also want to make sure that the names reflect the data below. So inside of Thread, whenever we're opening it, we can see that information. And because we can upload multiple data sets to a project, if we had uploaded one previously and this column already existed, this would just turn yellow, letting us know that that data already existed. Now, hopefully we won't have any issues where we have to upload the data a second time. We'll see. So we'll go ahead and hit save changes. And depending on the amount of data, if you're in the tens of thousands of entries, it might take a second to parse through all that data. So there was a little loading window that popped up and went away real quick. But our data has now been uploaded, and we're now getting this little indicator here saying 22 total entries were uploaded. If I click on that, or if I just go down to my first data set and go to entries, either one will take me to the same place. I can just look at my data and just make sure that it all came through correctly. Now, if we opened up the CSV and everything looked fine, we should be all right, but I can just do a quick check and say, okay, all my perimeter lengths are in the right columns, everything's accessible here. If I need to edit something, like let's say that the floor height here I know is wrong for some reason, I could hit edit and go in and modify any of this data and just save it as a new data set. But generally, it can be a little bit faster to do this inside of Excel. This is just kind of meant to be a little feature that's available if you don't have access to your original files and need to modify the data, or if you want to create data from scratch, you can also do that. So I'll go ahead and close that with no changes. Okay, so now that I've verified that my data has been uploaded from my CSV file and matches what's in Excel, I want to take that data and basically create a visualization dashboard to start to understand what's going on in this data set. So again, if you've used Power BI or you've used Tableau or a similar product to that, the kind of setup of this might be a little bit familiar, that it's generally looking at the aggregation of data and creating a custom dashboard. So I'm going to click on the drop down here, and I'm going to go to my Dashboard Explorer button here. And in the current version of Thread, this is going to take me to a blank dashboard. In later versions, we're looking to integrate some templates and some things to kind of help you get started with this. But for right now, you basically come to this editor where you can kind of create your first dashboard. So I'm going to go here, and I'm just going to drag in one simple little widget from the palette on the left, which I can scroll down and see all the different types and explore those later. Or I can also search if I kind of have an idea of what I'm looking for, like a donut chart. So I'm going to grab a donut chart and just drag it in to my Thread dashboard. Now, I get a little preview of what's going to show up in the dashboard itself. And I have the ability to kind of resize the widgets to kind of choose how I want to lay out my dashboard. And I can always modify these later as I begin to build up a dashboard. And I also have access to a whole series of settings by going up here to the Group By button in the General Settings button. And I can choose for this particular widget different settings that apply to how this data is being visualized. For a donut chart, the way the donut chart works is it basically groups together similar values. So maybe I just want to take the floor programs. And I have some little indicators over here that show me with a hash symbol or a pound symbol that this is basically a number. The little open quotes here tells me that this is a text or string. And then I have things like tags down here that tells me it's a tag collection. In this case, I'm interested in the floor programs because maybe what I want to do is I want to build a little dashboard here that's going to show me out of my entire project, what percentage of the project is each floor plate using. So I'll click floor program. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click sum by and then go to facade area here. And so, or sorry, not facade area, floor area. And so I just want to group together and say, okay, in the floor program, what is the floor area? Group by. And so now I'll see in the background that the actual pie chart has changed to indicate what percentage now each program, which is how it's grouped by, of the total floor area. And there is a question in the chat that says, who owns the data or models that are uploaded to Mirar or Thread? Is there a way you are able to aggregate the data coming in to understand national or worldwide trends in buildings? So really great question. Right now, the data and the model you own, the person who uploads it owns. Yeah, technically core, we could go in there and, go into AWS and try to piece together all the parts, of your particular project. But we've kind of intentionally built it to make that very difficult. But basically the data is currently uploaded to S3 and you own it. We don't access anything inside of the data. The only information we pull out is like how many models you have, how many views you have, nothing about the views themselves, but just to help us understand like how people are actually using the apps. But we don't pull any of the kind of data other than what you provide in your user profile, meaning your company name or something like that. If you put that in there, that data we do aggregate. But when it comes to each app and the actual data from the projects and the models themselves, we don't do anything with that information. We just kind of take general amounts to understand how well it's working. The other question, which is a really great one as well, is are you able to aggregate data? So right now, no. What you would have to do is basically pull down and upload a CSV. However, kind of in the development track for this application and kind of a sibling application that's looking to combine these together, we are looking to basically allow you to pull in from data streams. Not quite sure what format that's going to take yet, but basically pulling in other data sources than essentially Excel files or CSV. So plugging into actual publicly published data set collections and also feeds of data as well. So right now you can't do that, but that is on the horizon going forward. Great question. Okay. So back in the donut chart settings, I have a few other things I can do, and pretty much all the widgets we'll be looking at today and all the widgets inside of the collection over here all have kind of individual settings, but there are some similar ones shared between them, such as a title. So for example, if I don't want a title on this chart, I can just delete this and the title at the top goes away. If I do want to put a title on it, but I want to put something meaningful, I might say program by area. That title will update at the top. I can also choose what I want to show here in terms of aligning the labels, and it's a little difficult to see in the background right now, but when I uncheck this, they just all go horizontal. If I align them, they all kind of rotate, so just depending on your preference, there's a lot of these different things you can do. And for almost all the widgets, I can also control the significant digits that get displayed in the widget itself. But for right now, let's just hit close, and I'm ready to save my first layout. So I'm going to click the Save button up here, and just call this data overview. I can give it a description, and since it's the first layout, it is going to be the default layout, so I'll go ahead and click Save Changes. When I do that, I'm going to see the background color has changed, and I've now exited the editor and in kind of the interactive dashboard. So now when I hover over the different parts of this pie chart, I get a little reflection here showing me what the actual additional information. So what is the sum of the floor area? How many floors are grouped together here? 16. So I'm getting some kind of top level information in this little drop down from the chart itself. But I'm also getting a summary of what was in that model that I uploaded, or a similar version of a model, as we'll see, from, in this case, the Grasshopper client, or from a Revit model as well. But let's say I want to do a little bit more. Let's say that I want to have the ability to actually look at the percentage within the model, but turn off some of the different layers or some of the different program types. So to do that, I'm going to go back and edit my layout by clicking the Edit button. Clear this here. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a new widget called the Data Tile Cloud and drag that in up to the top here. And what I'm going to do with this widget is I'm actually going to use this widget to go in and select the data type I want to filter, in this case a floor program. I'll go ahead and hit close. resize that widget to make it a little more compact there. And what I'm going to do with this particular widget, I'll go ahead and save it, save my current changes, is this is going to let me turn on and off with a series of buttons different programs. So if I want to get a better sense of the distribution ratio between my other programs without Office, I could uncheck Office, and now I get a better understanding of the mechanical versus retail split, and then lobby and amenity overall in the program itself. I can also take this data, and maybe I want to pull off some top-level analytics. So I'd like to know, as I begin to go in and through that filtering process, how much total floor area is left in the project, maybe how many floor plates I'm turning on and off as I go through it. So I'm going to go back and edit my dashboard once again, and I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to grab another little widget down here called the Scorecard. And again, as you can see, I can't remember exactly how many we have, but there's quite a few different widgets that kind of work between data visualization and also the more interaction with applications we'll see in a minute. But when I grab this Scorecard and drop it in here, I'm going to create two of them, actually. I'll slide it around. And one thing I'll note is like, Trace can be a little bit finicky with like reorganizing the tiles. So we're looking to improve this, but for right now, there's a little quirky sometimes. But I'm going to go ahead and edit the properties of the Scorecard. And what the Scorecard is going to do is it's going to let me select a metric like the total floor area and apply some type of analysis on the aggregated data. In this case, I can go ahead and just sum up all of the different floor areas. And I'll go ahead and give that a significant digit value of 0. Pardon me. Okay, and I'll hit close. Okay, hopefully my voice makes it. Okay, the next scorecard I'm going to look at is maybe I want to pull off another metric here, which is I want to look at the total number of floor plates that are left as I begin to filter. So I'm going to click the edit button here. I'll keep it at the floor area just so it's the same thing. But this time for the type, instead of choosing the sum, I'm going to go down and go to the total number of entries. And so we can see here we have a whole bunch of options such as the minimum, the maximum, the absolute value minimum, absolute value maximum, the total number of populated versus empty entries, the number of unique entries within here, averages, and then standard deviation. We'll just look at total entries right now because we have a pretty clean data set, and significant digits can be 0. So now when I hit save, as I go in and turn on or off different programs, we're going to see the total amount of floor area gets reduced here. And if I wanted to add additional decimal points in here, I can increase my number of significant digits. But I can basically see, okay, when I turn off Office, I have 68,000 square feet or meters. I don't remember what this was, probably feet, across an area of 4 floors across here. And if I want to make these a little bit clearer, I can go back and edit. And I'm again going to modify their name, and I'll just call this one total area. Or actually, let's just call this one floor plate area. And for my second card here, I'm just going to say number of floors. Now, when I save that again and load it in, I'll now see that those labels have been updated to give me a little bit more information. Pardon me. And now what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back into the dashboard one more time, and maybe I want to see each individual floor's data. So I can go down to my data table widget down here and pull this in, which is just going to give me a generic table listing all the entries or the individual floors in this case of my project. If I edit this one, I have a slightly different interface where I have this series of tiles that are going to allow me to turn off all the data that's currently displayed in the table and then selectively go in and turn them on. So in this case, I might do floor program. And I can also drag around the order to change what order I'd like this to be displayed in the table. So I might add additional information such as let's keep the floor area in there. But let's also look at the performance of the floor in terms of overlook. So I'm going to check this option for Facade Overlook here, which is basically going to tell me floor plate, how much it's looking at itself, and that kind of X-shaped floor plate we had earlier. Okay, and I'll leave everything the way it is right now. I'll go ahead and hit close, save this. And so now I've built up a dashboard that allows me to go through, look at the kind of aggregate percentages of the different programs across all the different floor plates, turn on and off the different programs to filter, understand a more granular look at my results, get some top level summaries up here about the total floor areas and number of floors, and then also view additional data that I can customize as many points that I've uploaded as I want in this table here to kind of see the difference. But now let's make it a little bit easier to actually compare the different data points to one another. So up here at the top, we're going to go to the drop down here that says color by. Pardon me. And similar to what we did inside of Mirar, we can go and choose one of our attribute categories or columns and click on that particular attribute and actually color the data results based on the numeric values and also the kind of grouped categories. So in this case, we'll see our office, retail, mechanical, lobby, and amenity are all now colored based on the category they represent. Now, not all widgets, excuse me, not all widgets are currently colored. Some of them still just kind of stay generic monochrome, but most of them that actually display analytical results all now have the same color set. And if we don't like that color, maybe we want to go to a different color palette like Metro, we can select a different color palette. And if we also want to shift around the order, reverse how the colors are used, maybe we want our offices to be this kind of lighter green, we can go in and change that so we can make this more legible for our purposes. So now when I turn off office, I get this really nice kind of simple to understand relationship between the pie chart showing me the percentage of mechanical, seeing the two floor plates that have mechanical information here, and then finding out additional information about those floor plates. If I want to save this data and maybe include it in part of an InDesign report or a printout or any other application, I can always go up to the little snack bar up here, and I can click the screen capture dashboard button. When I click that, it'll take just a second, and it'll load up, create a high resolution image of that dashboard. So in this case, I have my unfiltered results all being shown here. And if I maybe filter the option, so let's turn Office on and export a different screen capture, then it becomes really easy to kind of build up multiple different layers to that report and include them as part of a larger document itself. And I might even go in here and say, okay, I'd actually like to see all the floor plates, not have it kind of clicked off. So I could go and expand this particular widget down to the scale that I need to kind of capture the full scope for the sake of generating that image. And then I'll go back up here and capture the image with all that information. If I want to take this dashboard and kind of remove all of the interface around it and really just focus in on the data and the dashboard that I built, I can also click this little full screen button here, and I'll go to a full screen mode on the actual dashboard that I created. There's some additional filtering options that are available here, including tagging the current data, rating it, and also downloading a CSV of the filtered data. So if I just wanted to download the same CSV of all the data shown here without Office, I could click here and download that filtered data. But generally, this is kind of the interface for the Thread application that allows you to customize a dashboard. So what we're looking at right now is pretty much pure data visualization. But this project actually came from a Mirar model that we downloaded. So maybe what I'd like to do is I'd like to reconnect this model to Mirar and have an interaction between the data set itself and 3D information. So I'm going to click Edit again on my dashboard. I'm going to hit Save. And now I'm going to call this one Data Model View. And I'm going to save this as a new layout. So now if I click on this dropdown, I have two layouts. I have a data overview, which is the same layout currently, and I have a second one called data model view, and I can toggle between them. So let's customize the second one to introduce the 3D model back into the scene or the dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and delete my data table and this one. And what I'd like to do now is I'm going to scroll down to the Mirar Viewer widget, which is a custom one that interacts with the core application Mirar that we just looked at. I'm going to resize that since my project is a little more vertical. And under the settings here, what I can do is down at the bottom, one of those views that I created inside of the Mirar application, I can paste that hyperlink here and use that hyperlink to integrate the model into the dashboard. Now, again, for our purposes, I provided a link to the model that's associated with that data set you can download. So either now or if you'd like to do this after the course, I can copy the address to that particular view. And I'll see the kind of prepending formatting is the same here. And I'll go back into Thread and paste this into this input here and hit close. Now when I do that, I now have that 3D model view available inside of my Mirar, or sorry, inside of my Thread report. And if I go in, I can actually color by choosing, let's do floor program again. And the color palette that's coloring the model will be reflected by the color palette that I select here. So I have full interaction now between my data visualization and my 3D model. 3D model can still be moved around, and so I can change the view orientation or interact with it in real time. And I can also filter or interact with the settings in the view by going in here and hovering the mouse over the different pie wedges, which will isolate the elements in 3D that this data is associated with. I can turn on and off the different layers here. And so in this way, I can kind of have an interaction between my kind of data visualization and my 3D model. I can also go back into the settings for the viewer, and I could say, okay, don't hide the filtered elements, just kind of ghost them out. And while I'm in here, maybe I'm also just going to create a little search box and add that to part of my dashboard. And so now, when I apply that color by to the scene, and I filter the information, I still get these little ghosted remnants of the model in the view. So I can see where the floor plates I'm isolating here are relative to the other floors. And maybe I want to go in here and look at searching for, let's just say, office only. So I can actually filter and query the information based on the search. So one of the attributes that I don't think is in this model, but I've put in previous ones, is like client names or something like that. So I can search for particular results and isolate those elements. So in this way, I can kind of create an interaction now between my 3D model and a more robust kind of data visualization platform. Are there any questions about this so far or thoughts? No? Okay. All right, so really quickly, I'll just show one other thing you can do by actually jumping to a different project, and then we'll come back to this one until we get a few more things we can customize. The next application that we'll look at after we finish walking through Thread is an application called Trace, which I mentioned is brand new. And this actually allows you to integrate a 2D view in addition to a 3D view. So one of the things you can do is similar to the way that we integrated with the 2D drawing. Oops, let me grab the right layout here, is we can bring in that 3D model using the Mirar viewer, and we can also bring in 2D information, drawings from either Revit sheet sets, or in this case from Grasshopper drawings, and we can still have the same type of integrated data visualization with things like the floor program that can recolor the drawing itself and the model, and have the same interaction in both 2D and 3D between the various different aspects. So whether this was, again, master planning, a simple diagram, some type of chart, then we can access and color by both the 2D and the 3D information and the data visualization here. And there's a question in the chat: when clicking on Office, can a PDF or image pop up in Thread? Great question. So actually there is a somewhat working version of this right now, where for images, you can actually upload images with the data. And so you can filter by that. Let me see if I can find an example of that just to look at. This is an old project, so hopefully it still works. Let me just show this. So one of the things you can do is you can upload data as part of your data set using our Grasshopper Exporter. And then when you filter information, you can filter down on specific images. And so you can actually have images you create be associated with that. For the question of PDFs or other types of integration like that, we have a new feature inside of the dataset, which actually allows you to upload files. And so there's a component here, which I'll find an example of in a minute, called a file list. And what this will do is it'll basically, it's another widget. Let me find a project that shows this. Hopefully I still have one. I think data set with files. Maybe this works. Yes, okay, I need to adjust this layout so we can see this a little bit easier. Okay, so in this case, we actually have uploaded a whole series of files, and I'll show how to do that in just a second here. And we can filter that with the data. It's associated with each data point. So now if I were to click on any one of these images, it basically opens up in a different window. But this can be a PDF, it can be a Word document, it can be several different types of files, pretty much any generic file. And so you can kind of have the links to those files available to you. I'm jumping around a little bit, but just to kind of answer that question. So under the widget types, you can have those associated files, which again are basically will open in a separate window or be a download potentially. There's also another component in here, which we just looked at in that quick example called the image tiles, which will basically bring up that series of images that can then be filtered down. There's another one called a image details, which will just show the top or the whatever the highest kind of sorted value is, so you can kind of preview the best value. And there's also a generic image input where you can just load an image into the project. So if you just wanted a a project rendering or something like that as part of the presentation, you can put that there. And this also leads to one other kind of widget we haven't talked about, which is kind of the custom content widget. So the custom content widget actually allows you to go in and just put in, oops, let's click the edit content button, any text you want. So this can basically be program, or let's just call this architecture project. And the formatting of the actual text uses a format called Markdown. And if you're not familiar with Markdown, which I certainly wasn't before getting into coding, there's a little link here to a Markdown cheat sheet, which will kind of tell you all these different characters and how to write using Markdown. There's also the ability in here to go in and pull down some data and integrate that into your total number of, into your text as just being data itself. So I could grab something like the total number of entries, and I could just do some basic mathematical things, but I'm looking for, we'll just do the count, I believe. The sum value, let's do that. For a column of, let's say, the total floor area. And if I copy that little text that gets generated in here, I'll actually see I get the data displayed down here with that information of what the total sum value is. And again, you're limited here. It's not going to automatically do decimal point rounding in the current version, but I can actually pull data in as well as just arbitrary text that I might apply. So an example of how this has been used on projects before is putting like a little description of what it is you're going to be doing in the dashboard, how you're supposed to interact with it. But also then like a hyperlink to perhaps the Mirar model or some other information. So there's certainly a lot more to Thread than what we're going to be able to cover in here. There are additional YouTube videos on the Core Studio YouTube channel that describe a lot of the different ways that you can work with Thread. And there's a question in the chat. Can you click on the Mirar model objects to filter information rather than widgets? Unfortunately, in the current version, no. There is one-way interaction right now where basically we're just kind of filtering the information from the dashboard to the Mirar model. It doesn't go the other way yet. I will say, not on the world's shortest timeline, but this is on the horizon as part of another project we're working on to have kind of complete interaction back and forth between all the different elements. So that is kind of scope for a more ambitious direction we're looking to take these applications in. But at this time, it's just kind of limited to a one-way interaction. And that's true for both Mirar and Trace, as we saw in a minute. Great questions. Okay, so a couple quick things to note, kind of top level on Thread. We've seen here how we can create multiple different dashboards and switch between them by changing these different drop-down options here. And you can create quite a few dashboards, you know, I won't say unlimited, but a lot of dashboards on here to kind of reflect the data or perhaps different data sets in a view. You can also change between data. We don't have any other data sets loaded here, but maybe you did like 2 or 3 different versions of this project. You can actually switch out the data that drives the dashboard, so you can go back and forth between different data options pretty quickly. But we'll notice every time we change, it resets our color by and our filtering values to the default. And so, whoops, we also had this little guy jump down here. Let's put him back where he goes. As I mentioned, it's a little finicky. Okay, but let's say we want to keep those kind of colored by states so that we can share or show another team member how to actually, or what they can learn from the dashboard filtering we've set up. To do that, we're going to go to a new concept within a thread called a report. And what a report lets you do is, let's say that I've gone here and I've, just like I did before, colored by the floor program, changed my color to Metro, flipped the colors around, and then I'm just starting off with a dashboard where I want someone to be able to interact with this object. I can go up here to my reports category and click on start a new report. I'll call this report program overview. And what a report is it's basically a slideshow or a series of pages that will allow us to save different states of filtering, different dashboards, all of our current configuration, and allow someone to go through this. So when I click edit here, I can start generating that report. So I'm going to start with this first layout here and hit plus, and I'll just call this one all program table. Okay, because I don't have anything filtered, everything is open and accessible. And maybe in the next one, what I want to do is I want to show just the programs that are non-Office. So I'm going to create a new page in the report that's going to save that filtered state called No Office Programs. Okay. And I might want to create a third page in the report where I'm going to turn Office back on, but I'm going to change my data overview layout to my data model view layout. And here I might go in and we'll actually go ahead and just, we'll leave it the way it is. We won't do any filtering. But I'm going to go ahead and hit plus again to save this as model view. Okay. And once I'm done editing the report, I can just close out of it. And now if I go to reports dropdown, I can choose my new report I generated called program overview. And if I hit the little play button, I can go back and forth between my different states of the model here, including the 3D model view. I can also go full screen if I want to just run through the report here, and I can click up here on this little button to switch back and forth between my different kind of filters in the model view itself. And if I'd like to share this with someone so that they can interact with it and play around with the data and kind of get a feel for the project, whether that's kind of letting a client go through and kind of, you know, be part of the decision-making process, or giving the consultant the option to play through multiple different variables, I can go down to the drop-down for the project and go to my reports page here and see a little summary of all the reports I made. If I right-click on this, I can copy the link to this report, and in a new window, I'll paste it, and I'm going to get an error. And the reason I'm going to get an error is this report is still private because the project's private. So kind of like Mirar, everything starts off being private. So that way, if you don't want to accidentally share this information with someone, you won't be able to. But if I go to my project settings here, in the dropdown for the project, I can hit edit, and I can make this project public. And save the edit here. And now, if I go to that incognito window again, I can now visualize that report. Now I can't modify the data, I can't edit it in any way. I can still interact with it the way the dashboard was set up for setting up the type of interaction. I can go through the different pages of the report as well and see the kind of model information and access all of this. However, I don't have the ability to modify any of the data itself. I'm just kind of looking at this curated report that was created here. If I do want to give someone control over the platform, or sorry, over the project, I could add them as a user the same way I did inside of Mirar by just hitting the little plus sign here, putting in their email address, and then giving them edit and admin permissions. And then they will have to sign up for Mirar, or not Mirar, Thread to use this. But I can also access or restrict them to just reports. So if I don't want to make my project public, I want to keep it private, but I want to share it with select people, I can add them here and then give them access to the reports only. And Hanshen, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they do have to be signed up for Thread still for this.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. So right now we don't have kind of like a one-on-one sharing option available just yet, but as part of that kind of larger project we're talking about, that's something that's coming up. So that's kind of a quick overview of the Thread platform, and hopefully that gives you a sense of kind of what you can do in terms of kind of building your own dashboards, coordinating your data with kind of 3D and 2D information, and then also being able to share that collaboratively. The last application we're going to look at today kind of is in the same vein as these other two, but focuses on 2D drawings and kind of bringing the functionality that Mirar has in terms of kind of accessing attributes down to 2D drawing sets. So this project is very new, and it's a concept that came about a few years ago, thinking about in the current kind of project and process, you have, engineers, architects, consultants, landscape architects, interiors groups, specialty practices, all these types of people interacting in a common BIM model, and all of them loading all this data and information onto the elements, into different model states, etc. And then at the end of the day, all of this gets exported to a PDF, and if it's not in a table, not linked to in a spec, or called out in a detail or something, all that intelligence and the information is essentially lost unless you have Revit and are able to open up that program again. So the question we had was, okay, can we actually take all of the attributes and actually load them onto the drawings in the sheets, in this case inside of a BIM sheet set in Revit, but also there's a Grasshopper plugin for this, which is soon to be released, and then make that information accessible outside of the platform itself. And that was kind of the driver behind Trace. So you can download and install the plugin for this. The only issue you're going to run into is, as of today, as a conflict with Mirar. So that's something we'll be fixing hopefully next week. And it's the same Revit sample file, but from that sample file, you can click on this link here and see the upload process we're about to go through. So Trace's upload sequence is very simple. I'm going to go in here real quick and just unfortunately have to go in and delete the Mirar exporter just because we have a conflict that we haven't resolved yet. Okay, and relaunch it. And as I've mentioned a couple times, Trace is in very early alpha, so its functionality is still somewhat limited, though we think it's kind of powerful. And also, there is still a lot of development work to be done around Trace and the kind of concept here. So if anyone wants to try it out or is interested by the idea, please feel free after today's workshop to follow up and reach out with either things you would like to be able to do with Trace, things that you find don't work, or just things you would like to use cases you could think of for the Trace application itself. So the way Trace works is basically Trace will take your sheet sets, your sheets that you develop inside of Revit. So in this case, in the sample file, we just have 4 sheet sets, 3D views of the model, a couple kind of select simple floor plans, 2 kind of elevations, and some sections through the model. And with the Trace uploader, which is in the Core Toolbox Alpha button here, when you launch this, fingers crossed, You have a really simple interface right now where you can just go in and select the sheets that you want to upload, give it a project name, and click upload. And this does take a little bit of time because each one of these has to be converted over to a DXF for that information to be read. So for anyone who's ever exported PDFs or DXF from Revit, you know it's a slightly time-consuming process to go through. So the uploader here certainly is not as fast as the 3D exporter can be. However, depending on the complexity of your drawing set, the upload time isn't necessarily that bad. And also the Grasshopper Exporter version of this is much faster, taking just a few milliseconds as well. We're also working on a generic DXF uploader as well, but again, that's kind of on the horizon. Okay, so our project has been uploaded. So now if I go to Trace, once I'm logged in, I will come to my projects page. And I can scroll down here and find the project that I just uploaded, AECtech demo. And if I expand the upload date, I'll see all the sheets that I just uploaded, which in this case is just one sheet. And I can click on that. Watch the progress bar at the bottom as it loads up. And now my sheet set from Revit has been uploaded, including text, some annotations, as I said, it's still under development, and our kind of 2D drawn elements. Now, if we notice when we hover over the elements, it's not on a per line basis that we're selecting, but it's based on the actual family object itself. So when we're looking at this model, and we can go in and click on one of these elements, we're actually accessing the family-based attributes of that original drawn element. So this is kind of the same thing as going into Revit, going into the floor plans, double-clicking on a view, hovering over here, tabbing through until you just get one wall, clicking here, and then scrolling down through the attributes over here. All of that same data that you could kind of go through that multi-click process is now available on this kind of lightweight drawing set. And so you can click on the different elements and see their different attributes that are associated with them. Also, similar to what we saw in Mirar, because we have all those aggregated attributes here, we can go in and color by the object type. So we can begin to add a kind of analytic layer to our drawing by going in and beginning to take that data and visualizing it, including things like, let's say that we're looking at a project and we want to know whether something has been drawn in model space or paper space. We can click on that generalized attribute here and then get kind of a highlight showing us, okay, did this actually come from the model, or is this like a filled region or a detail line or something that's been drawn inside a paper space? So it lets us do a little bit of a check on the quality of our models and our drawings as well to make sure the values are coming through. And so we can cycle through a whole series of different attributes, the same way we could with Mirar, and color our model. If we look at another project, which is the link that was actually provided in the Trace thread project here, we can see a upload oops, clicked on the wrong one, but we'll go ahead and show this one anyway, and then go back to that other one. What we're loading up right now is we're loading up our actual 3D view. Let's go ahead and take a preview of it as the instances are loading in. We can actually watch the geometry come in. But now we see our kind of 3D drawing set that we exported. This was just a single export from there, from an earlier version of this project. But I can now see that even though I have that 3D model, I'm still able to access the properties of each element and do my color by type of operations. Oops, should have done family and type on here. And apply those same color by operations to this 2D drawing of the 3D element. Now, a few things I'm noticing here. One, the kind of color line weights are a little bit thick. So let's go to the settings for this particular project and modify that. Oops, clicked on the properties. And so under my options, I'm going to go down to my color by gradient, and I'm going to drop that color by width down to maybe something like 0.5. I'm also going to change the color scheme because I don't really like the yellows here. And so once I click that gradient, it's going to change. And this is a heavier drawing, so it's going to take a little time. And also this takes more time once again when we're kind of casting over the web. But now I can basically go here and see a kind of analytic overlay on top of that 2D drawing, which is directly from my Revit sheet set. If I go back into my properties over here, let's just look at a few other things we can do. I might want to go in and actually turn off some of the layers. So let's say I don't want the sheet set. I just want to actually see the drawing itself. I'm going to expand the layers, and I'm going to turn off paper space, and I'm going to turn off text. And so now I'm just looking at the drawing element on its own. And maybe I want to look at the floor slabs or what's left of them. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the curtain panels as well, which is going to increase the speed of the actual viewer once all those are hidden. Now, keep in mind, what you see is what you get in terms of the drawing. So in this case, because of the way the 3D view is constructed, we still have those floor slabs visible underneath. But for things like our columns, we'll notice it's not like the whole line drawing is in there, like a model in the background. Basically, the way Revit graphically broke this up into a series of little bands is now how it's displayed here. So what we get in terms of the sheet set is only what's available. So if I were to turn off something like our floors, we won't suddenly see the columns. We're going to see the fragments of the columns themselves because those aren't actually drawn inside of Revit. However, when I select them, I'm selecting the entire entity of the object, including this kind of really hidden one here or one like this, instead of kind of the individual, pardon me, individual lines. Okay. And the last thing I want to show inside of Thread is just a really quick example of an export for Grasshopper, where Grasshopper lets us have a lot more control over the types of geometry that we're showing. So one of the things I can do is the data set here is much smaller because it's pulled from Grasshopper. I can still color by based on something like the program. This is actually what the drawing we saw in Thread earlier that was used. But I have some additional options that are currently only available in the Grasshopper exporter to actually say, actually, I don't want to color by the stroke. I want to color by the fill. Maybe I'll give that a slight opacity, and I'll change the color. And now, when I'm actually coloring the analysis layer on this drawing, I'm not going in and coloring the curves themselves, but because I brought this in as a filled region or as a surface inside of the Grasshopper exporter, which should be available in the next couple of weeks for a download, I can now actually color the interior here. This is going to be supported shortly in Revit as well for things like hatches or filled regions or room boundaries. So for example, if you've ever opened the horrible little starter Revit architectural model, one of the layouts has kind of hatched filled colors showing rooms. That functionality is currently under development, but isn't currently available in Revit at this point, but should be soon. But the nice thing here is we can go through and we can now color each one of these floor plates based on its attributes. So it's a very quick way to kind of take this Grasshopper model or drawing and actually generate a series of kind of interactive diagrams, maybe as part of a presentation. And we can also go to the settings, just like with Mirar and Thread. And under the project settings, we can make the project public if we want, or private, toggle that back on and off if we want to share it. And we can also add users to the team using the same type of format we had before. And one other quick example I'll pull out from a project I did years ago at Woods Bagot, and this isn't even really the project, it's just a simple representation. But again, this is something where this all had to be done in Illustrator and changed every time the data changed, but maybe we just have like a simple tower design here. And we want to do a color by overlay based on different attributes. So we'll change the fill color here. Yep, there we go. All right, and then maybe I want to color this by owner and basically see now a little legend down here, client A, client C, hotel owner, etc. See the program distribution. I could do something like loading in phasing to understand the sequence in which the building can be constructed. Something simple like levels. Areas of each one of the floor plates was actually pulled from the plan and then loaded against this. And then programs showing the kind of distribution of the mechanical floors and other information across here. So again, this is just kind of showing another potential example, another process behind this is several master plan projects we've worked on. I'm beginning to kind of show the programming and the different phasing and different use cases of the drawing itself. So rather than flipping back and forth between a whole bunch of different PDFs or toggling between kind of Grasshopper running in the background, or building out animations where you have to keep rewinding or going forward, you can kind of have this interactive analytical layer applied to these drawings on the platform that you can, share with others or basically view on the web. Mobile as well, although it's certainly less tested at this point than Mirar is. So that's actually the conclusion for today's workshop. If anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I hope you try out these applications and please reach out to us with further feedback or any interest you have. But yeah, if there are any questions, feel free to ask now, and thank you for your time. All right, if there's no questions, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event as well. Thank you.